As you know, we are working on a European research project, Transcontainer, is researching different kind of biological containment strategies. We think the reasoning of the European Commission to fund this kind of research is something like it may help to facilitate coexistence of GM and non-GM agriculture in Europe. What is your views on this kind of reasoning? Do you think that we need biological containment strategies for coexistence in Europe, or do we don't need them? What's your view about this?
If you want me to start, I can say maybe just from a practical point of view, I think it is one of the options. I think if you are looking at coexistence strategies in practical agriculture as well as in plant breeding and seed production, you will find a pretty wide range of tools that are being used in order to organize coexistence. Technical, managerial, biological. So I think this is definitely one possible option that you can look at. But you will see that it is indeed only one. There are quite a number, and I think depending on the crop in question, depending indeed of what you want to achieve, you might look at a different combination of strategies and tools being used by farmers, seed producers or plant breeders. Whether or not there is a specific difference between GM and non-GM coexistence, I think that is rather a philosophical question. Technically, we are looking at plants, and from that point of view, the question is, in this case, indeed, whether we really go down the right kind of road if we try to organize things differently in this specific area of coexistence or not.
Could you tell me why is it being organized differently compared to, because it relates to GM, why is this? What is the differences?
Well, if you're going to use a genetically modified containment system, the containment system itself is going to be subject to an immensely more bureaucratic approval system, and will itself have to show that it does not, that it can coexist with the rest of agriculture, and there's a sort of contradictio in terminis there. I mean, if you have a genetically modified containment system, then you're going to be subject to the same over-regulation that other GM solutions are. So that is what we considered a bit strange, that the whole project Transcontainer seems to have focused on developing new transgenes.
Are you aware of companies within your own sector, your own branch, working on these kind of containment strategies? And if so, why are they doing it?
That's an interesting question, because of course a good 10 years ago a number of companies were working on containment strategies, and then an international furor broke out. Somebody found a beautiful word called Terminator technology, which is containment strategies. And the Cartagena Protocol elicited from all the parties that they would put a moratorium on them. And that is really interesting, because the professionals, both public and private sector professionals, said from day one, don't ban this, you may want it. And it's not different in its phenotype from, for example, seedless grapes or triploid sugar beet varieties, which in those days were still used, and so on. And so it was banned for reasons that had nothing to do with biological containment. So even if tomorrow we would, both public and private, bring a lot of these technologies back online, European Union would first have to unban it.
But it's not a moratorium on research.
That is true,
and
but what's the point?
That's the reason, because that's also why, because Transcontainer can at least do this research in the laboratory, up eventually in the greenhouse. So, okay, there is a certain kind of moratorium, but I mean, it leaves still sufficient room, I would say, for seed or biotech companies to go on further researching these kind of technologies.
Why would they do it if there is a moratorium on releasing them in the field? Why would I spend millions on creating a new containment strategy for maize or for oilseed rape, while there is a moratorium on taking it further down the lab.
Why were they developed in the what was the reason for first developing them? Why did the companies think these are interesting technologies?
Male sterility systems was just to have an alternative to an existing male sterility system.
For hybrid breeding?
For hybrid breeding.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's one thing. Technologies to avoid that seed would be fertile were thought of in the context of developing crops for raw material production for the bio-based economy. If you want to make pharmaceuticals in plants, you definitely want zero. And then you want a GURT, as they have now called it. Mm-hmm. Yeah? So a lot of that work was done in the context of we're going to bring plants in the future to the farmers and to the chemical industry where they make specific raw materials for the chemical industry. Europe has a massive policy around that. It's called the knowledge-based bioeconomy. Mm-hmm. And it's just feeding into that strategy. And in the context of that, for some of the raw materials, you definitely would not want them to end up in the food chain. So what you want is a good, really solid containment system.
I'm really thinking about Transcontainer is now as public sector research, it's developing these kind of things, and on the other hand you want to have, and that's also what the Commission wants to have, is some value from this research, from this project. And I'm asking myself, what's really the interest, or under what kind of conditions would say the public sector biological containment technology be interesting?
If we look at research, and in this case public funding of research, what we're interested in is, the nice German word is Erkenntnis, which means you want to get yourself to a different level of understanding. But if you from the beginning limit that by saying, yes, we want to learn more, but it has to stop at a certain point, you're limiting your capacity for research, and you're with that also limiting the potential outcome, also with that the benefit to society that you might find. So I think one of the principal preconditions to go further in the direction that you described would be indeed that decision makers, and in this case, for example, at higher levels in the Commission, realize and also make that publicly known, not least to the private sector, that they might reconsider this whole issue because they see that maybe it was not a good decision to ban a certain area of research because it was considered to be politically unacceptable. Not because of the outcome of the research, but more because of an international political situation.
At this moment, you have, for some of these projects in Transcontainer, you have half a proof of concept. I have as a research manager, I don't understand what you can do with half a proof of concept.
Yeah, you really need field tests also.
Absolutely.
And,
you need to go one step further, and I think if indeed this, I would not overestimate, if you want, the impact that an individual research project such as this, or any other for that matter, would have on reshaping European policy. And obviously in this case we would have to look even beyond the European Union, as we're talking about the Cartagena Protocol. So we would look at a wider level. But it is one of those first bricks maybe that you have to lay to build a house. So it might contribute to opening up the discussion again, which indeed on this specific item had been closed for quite some time. So if indeed we are going back to what indeed R&D and such projects should do, opening up people's minds to say, well, we should not ban ourselves from thinking outside of this typical box, indeed, I think then it has already contributed, it has already then achieved one of its goals.